Welcome back, and a very warm welcome to those of you who are watching here on our Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. My name is the Reverend Mike Mickey. I'm the rector of St. Thomas Episcopal Church and School in San Antonio, Texas. So glad that you are able to join us for this, our second of three teaching sessions on grief, finding meaning in grief. Last week, in the first session, we talked about the 5 stages of grief. These 5 stages were first identified by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and you'll recall that these stages are not linear, and that often people find themselves taking longer in some stages than in other stages, right? These 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I won't go over these again now because you can go back and watch last week's class if you want to learn more about those. Several of you have reached out to me to tell me that this was helpful and that you were able to find yourself in one or more of these stages. I know I have been in them myself. I want to share with you tonight that, one of the reasons why I wanted to teach this class is that in my first 18 months as rector of St. Thomas, I was really taken by how many people were in this process of grief in our congregation, quite particularly the grief of a spouse, the loss of a husband or a wife. This is a grief that I do not know, thanks be to God, but it is a grief that I have had the honor to witness in others here at church and even in my own family. So what I want to do mostly tonight is just to take this time together just to be a witness to your grief if you're going through this, the loss of a spouse, to honor it and to say how sorry I am for what you're going through tonight. Also going to spend most of the time talking about, what it might be like for you. Not because I'm going to try and fix it, because, we can't do that. But because I think it's really good for us to say out loud what these things are that you might be feeling and to let you know there's nothing wrong with you feeling this way. So if you are tonight experiencing other sorts of grief other than the grief of a spouse, like the grief of a child or a friend or a pet, perhaps you can find yourself in some of this, but tonight specifically I want to talk about what it means to lose a spouse. Perhaps the hardest thing about losing a spouse is when they were also your best friend. It's a double loss, spouse and best friend. And the hole that leaves is an enormous hole, isn't it? Similarly, they were probably your best support person, the person who knew your moods, knew just what to say to lift you up, knew just what to say to calm you back down. You used to have a go-to person, and then now suddenly with the loss of your spouse, it feels like you don't have a go-to person anymore. A good spouse shows us about the love of God, don't they? Because they're a source of unconditional love. Who else but Lori accepts me with all of my flaws? No one. People do it, but no one does it quite as good as Lori does. So this loss, your spouse, they knew you, and they're one of these precious people in our lives that God has given us that, loved you for you. There's a knowing that only comes with a lifetime of living together, as so many of you had with the spouses that you've loved and lost. My mother and father met in high school, and losing a lifelong relationship like that is so, so hard, no matter how long it's been for you. The source of unconditional love and acceptance and dependability. What is that like to have it one day and have it be gone the next? For many of you, your spouse was the person who looked after you, who got you up and at 'em, got you were a great reason for you to get up in the morning. They were the people who, made sure you took your pills, made your doctor's appointments, and just took care of yourself, and so much more. Your spouse was probably a source for physical touch and comfort. And here you are, maybe without that today. The holding of a hand, patting on a shoulder, a hug, and just this longing for physical contact and intimacy that all of us have been created to have. For many of you, I know, your house now just has you in it, or it used to have you and your spouse in it. There's no more loud snoring or loud TV channels, and perhaps it's gotten quiet and it's gotten lonely. For I know some of you, life was pretty organized and routine before the death of your spouse. There was a great little predictability and a joy in the passing of your days together. And now here you are, and there are these weird bills to pay, a lot of decisions to make that you don't really know how to make. And for some of you, even maybe a loss of income that's affecting you and your lifestyle. And with that comes this pressure, right, to want to do right by them after they've died, and also to do right by your family. So now all of a sudden, things were normal, and now it's all upside down, and you're overwhelmed, and you want to do the right thing, but you don't know how to do it, and maybe you're just feeling incapable. Hope I'm making sense up here. And maybe you can find yourself a little bit in this. For some of you, maybe it's beginning to dawn on you that you're single again. Wow, that can be a really big difference from being married to being single. And this can be hard for a whole lot of reasons, right? For some people, this state of no longer being married makes you feel really out of place all of a sudden. I see this particularly true in the life of a church, because especially when people came to church and were known as a couple inside of the church, and then all of a sudden when one spouse dies, it can be really, really difficult and painful for that spouse to go back to the church where they were known as a couple. Why? Because people will just say every time they see you how much they miss your spouse, or you don't quite know what your place is inside the life of the church without your wife or without your husband. And so when people experience this, or and other times, it's also just too painful for the widow or widower to come back to church, because it's just a reminder of what they no longer have. So what happens oftentimes is people will find a new church, or they'll just stop going to church at all. I've seen it a lot of times over my years as a pastor where, hi, how are you? Is this your first time here? Yeah. Well, what brought you to church today? Well, my husband just died. And so we were used to be members of da-da-da, and now I'm here. Another thing that can be hard about return to being single is you might be thrown into situations where there are a lot of couples, and you're not a couple anymore. You're at a dinner party or a social event, and everyone seems paired off, but you now, and you start to feel like a third wheel. For some of you, now I know this isn't all of you, but for some of you this might be true. This might be where it's good, so we're in a live stream, so you don't have to look at your neighbor next to you. You can just let you this be you if it's you. Okay. As time goes on, I know that some of you might beginning to feel pressure to start dating from friends, from people who want to date you, and even from family members. Mom, why don't you get back out there? Dad, go on a date. I was watching, what was I watching on TV? It was probably a football game or something. And there was this commercial of these like fabulous looking older people. And it was like this dating site for people 50 years and older. And I don't know what it was called, like Silver Singles or something like that. And I turned to Lori and said, whew, can you imagine being on Silver Singles? And maybe some of you have been on a site like that, or know people that have. You might find yourself all of a sudden open to that idea of dating again. And maybe you're a person that might actually enjoy that. Now, I know others of you can't even bear the thought of doing that. Like, no way am I doing that again. So whether you're in kind of the I might date again crowd or the no way I'll date again the crowd, what I like to ask of each other is for us to be okay with both groups. Like, be okay with the person that doesn't want to date again, and also be okay with the person that does. Because remember, all of us go about this thing and through this differently, right? But for those of you who are dating or thinking about it, it can be a complicated thing dating someone who is grieving, or to date someone else while you yourself are grieving. The other person, the non-griever, may not understand or be in the same place in their grief if they're grieving as well as you are. But as we'll talk about at the end of this session and more on our last one, let's remember, right, that that death does not end the relationship with your spouse, right? Just because they've died doesn't mean that your relationship with them is over. So you can take their memory with you in life and love someone new in the present while cherishing your spouse who has died. This can be possible. Now, not everyone can do that or actually should do that. But there are healthy and beautiful ways that I have seen people continue to love their spouse who've died and love again in a very healthy and beautiful way. I did the wedding of two people, a widower and a widow, both of whom were over the age of 80, who, are you ready for this, reconnected at their 60th high school reunion. How great is that? And this wedding was like one of the most fun weddings I've ever done. It was awesome, and their relationship then and it is now just a beautiful thing to witness that they found love again later in life. So let's keep on making our list, right, of things that are particularly difficult about the loss of a spouse. When you have children, the death of a spouse can be particularly hard, right? No matter how old your children are, the loss of your spouse can be also the loss of your co-parent, right? So in addition to your own grief, you are now parenting children in their grief. And of course, for parents with younger children, this can be even more difficult. I mean, people who have lost their spouse when their children are school-aged, it can be such a disorienting time and overwhelming time for them. And your co-parent is gone. Now, all of a sudden, you're kind of like a single parent. What do you do? And let's not discount the fact that this might be hard, too, for those of you who have adult-age children. Because you know that each one of your children are different, right? And they're all going to be handling their grief differently. And you, as the surviving spouse, their mother, their father, they're going to be naturally looking to you as a source of comfort, as a source of wisdom. And now here you are in the midst of your grief, having to be some sort of healthy grief expert to help them along. And then all of a sudden you feel bad because you're not offering them the support that they need. And maybe even you're in the stage of anger, and it can lead to lashing out and disappointment. It's just hard. You've lost your co-parent. Then, as I continue to witness to the grief of those of you who've lost your spouse, there's the mourning of the loss of all the things that your spouse would have been at, that you're now experiencing without them. Things like weddings, things like graduations, and more. When my oldest daughter, Kelly, was married, it was a day that I severely missed my dad. You know, it was as wonderful as it was to have my mom there, it was hard not to have my dad there. My dad would have loved that wedding. He would have loved my son-in-law. So these things are hard. And this is why, right, the holidays can be so difficult. Because it's hard to have a great time around the Thanksgiving Day table or around the Christmas tree when you can think, oh my gosh, they would have loved this. And you can look across the table and see that empty chair or see that space that they would have been sitting in. And the highs turn into lows because all you can do is just remember what's been lost. Also, another pressure, I think, for surviving spouses is that you may now be feeling that you're the keeper of the flame of the memory of your spouse to your children and your grandchildren. Like now you're supposed to be the embodiment, the resident of knowledge of that person, to tell the stories and to keep their memory alive inside the family. And this is a wonderful thing to do inside your family dynamic, but it's also a difficult thing to do among the other pressures and responsibilities that you may be feeling, is to be the one that keeps the memory alive. And it can be hard for you, perhaps, to be, as time goes on, to be at these events, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the seventh, the 10th year after the loss, and you may be feeling like your spouse isn't being remembered like they used to, and that can be hard. I know it has to be hard because it's still new to you. It's still fresh to you, even when it seems like other people in the family have moved on. I'm making sense up here? Say yes. And so there's a lot of things to be grieving, to be mourning. You mourn what those left behind will miss out on. Like me missing my dad at my daughter's wedding. You mourn what they miss out on, right? Like dad would have loved the wedding, but you also mourn what you are missing out on now that they are gone. So it's like Kelly missed out, dad missed out, and now you're missing out because what a great experience it would have been for you to be at these things together. So things are better together, aren't they? So you miss it for your family, you miss it for them, but you also miss it for you because as sweet as these moments are in life, they would have been a little sweeter with them. And they're have a little tinge of melancholy and sadness because they're not there. Many people I've talked to who are grieving a spouse mentioned to me how it changes their identity. Even more so, we talked about going from being married to being single, but so much of who we are and who we think ourselves to be is connected to our spouse, right? Like being a husband is part of my identity. Maybe for you, being a wife was part of your identity. And now you find yourself in a place where that identity is suddenly and permanently shifted. And also you might be finding that your connectedness to your spouse's extended family is strained or even cut off, or like all of a sudden over, like after the funeral's done or something. For example, you might start to lose touch with your spouse's siblings, or if there were children from a previous marriage, you might lose touch with those children, or even your step grandchildren. These relationships that were once now natural and like almost obligatory now aren't so much. And it's strange waters to navigate. And more personally for you, you could be feeling regret. Maybe there's regret about things that could have been done that weren't done. Things that could have been said that didn't get said. You could be living right now with regret that things just didn't end right. Things didn't end up working out the way you wanted them to, and so you live with that regret. You know what I hear a lot from grieving spouses, like the things they'll mention the most to me are things like, I just miss the nice little things that they used to do. Do you feel this way? The kind actions around the house, someone to get the oil changed in the car, maybe the notes that they used to leave you, the compliments they used to give you, the inside jokes you used to have that you haven't had together. Some of you might even be missing the things that used to drive you crazy. Perhaps for some of you ladies out there, the toilet seat just is never left up anymore. And what you wouldn't give for that toilet seat to be up just one more time, Even the things that drove you nuts, you start to miss. So when so much of your life was spent together, now all of a sudden you find yourself on your own, right? And that is extraordinarily hard. And I want to be a witness to your grief. And I went through this whole list of things, and some of it might be even painful for you to hear or said out loud. But it's important to say it out loud and to witness it in ourselves and to witness it in each other and for each other, because it is good for us to say to each other that being alone is lonely. And the idea of facing the rest of your life that way in this state is enormously difficult. So what are we to do about this then? We've done a hard thing here tonight together that is just to name all this big list of things that I could come up with, and I bet there's things that you would probably add to the list that I just gave you of how you're feeling and the pressures you're feeling and the feelings you're feeling. But to see these things and to notice these things and to give yourself permission to feel these things, to allow yourself to actually feel what you're feeling, is good. That is much better than being in a place where you're thinking to yourself, why can't I just get over it? Or thinking, what is wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me that I miss him so much, or that I just keep wanting to feel her hand on my shoulder and I can't, right? It's such a better thing, rather than thinking, why can I just get over it? Thinking instead, how could I not be feeling this way? Because I love them so much. This is exactly normal for me to be feeling all these things. To be in that place where you allow yourself the normality of grief is just so much a better thing for you and a healthy thing for you. One thing I like to ask of grieving widowers and widows is please not to make any big decisions right away. What do I mean? things like deciding to move, selling a house, making a big financial decision that will impact you massively, or to make any sort of big life decisions in the initial fog of grief can often be unwise. It isn't always unwise, but it can often be unwise. So I want to encourage you and give yourself a little moment of pause. And while we're giving ourselves permission to feel, let's also give ourselves permission not to make a bunch of big decisions. Give yourself some time. Don't feel like you have to make all 1,000 decisions in the first 100 days of your spouse's passing. Can you do this for me? Even though there might be people, especially your kids or your friends or whoever, other family members that want you to go decide. They're on you're at the reception after the funeral, and your daughter turns to you and say, "Mom, I want you to come live with us in Phoenix." Well, it's okay for you to say, "Honey, I'm not in a place to even think about that right now." And that's good for her, and it's good for you, okay? And so another thing I would ask is, as hard as this may be, I don't want you to isolate yourself. Don't isolate yourself from your family, from your friends, and don't isolate yourself from Jesus. As we mentioned last week, when you're in the stages of grief, particularly anger and depression, these stages are quite often will lead to isolation, and quite naturally want to lead to isolation, like you just want to be by yourself. But that feeling to isolate and to push others away can also keep you from getting the help that you need. So if you feel like you need help or friendship or a listening ear, go and find that. Be brave and ask for it. And especially those of you at St. Thomas, let me know how I can help you, and the church can help you. It is exactly what we are here for. You remember how Jeremiah cried out to God? Those of you who remember my Jeremiah class that we did, 7 years ago, or 7 months ago, I don't remember which. Jeremiah cried out, "Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for you are my praise." So even reaching out to God is important, to say, "Lord, I need you. I need your healing. Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved." You do not have to fight this alone. No one wants you to fight it alone, and God doesn't ask you to fight it alone. So in our final few moments together tonight, and I don't want to keep you too long this evening, I want to introduce you again to David Kessler's idea of the 6th stage of grief in his book, Finding Meaning. Kessler, rightly in the book here, points out that that acceptance, the 5th and final stage of grief, isn't the end. Now, just imagine if it was, right? You go from denial to anger to bargaining to depression, and then acceptance. I've accepted it. So is that it? Just accept it? Kessler points out that there's got to be more than acceptance at the end of our grief, right? And that the 5th stage can't be the end. For people in grief, the people who are able to find meaning in their loved one's life and in their death do much better than those who don't find meaning. Now, what does he mean by finding meaning in your loved one's death? What it is it's empowerment to move forward in your life. Here's what Kessler writes. I'm going to read this twice. Meaning comes through finding a way to sustain your love for the person after their death while you're moving forward with your life. Say it again. Meaning comes through finding a way to sustain your love for the person after their death while you are moving forward with your life. It doesn't mean that you stop missing them. Quite the opposite. what it does is it brings with it a precious awareness of how great and precious life is, and how precious their life is. Not how precious their life was, but how precious their life is for you today. Friends, there's a direct connection between grief and love. Now, if you want to avoid grief, you can. But in order to avoid grief, you have to also avoid love. If you love, you will experience sorrow and grief. Can you live a grief-free life? Well, sure. But the only way to do it is not to love anyone. So meaning then, finding meaning, is how we reflect the love we had for our loved one in the life that we are living today. It's how we choose to bear witness to the gifts that they gave us. And when we can do this, bear witness to the gifts they gave us, this is how the healing can start to begin in us and actually bloom into a beautiful harvest. Last week I spoke about how lost I was after the death of my father, how sad I was that I couldn't get to him before he died. I was angry that I didn't get to talk to him, or that he didn't get to talk to me. My dad, if you ask me, he died younger than I wanted him to, and younger than his grandchildren wanted him to. So is that it? Should I just accept that my dad is gone? That's it? I mean, is it the end? No. There's meaning. Right? There's meaning in my dad's life today for me. And finding that meaning helps me in my grief. My dad was a very kind, very funny, and very committed man. And I want to tell you that his life taught me a lot about how you can live in such a way that allows you to see people that might often be unseen. My dad had a way of noticing everyone that was in any room that he was in. You ever known somebody like that? It's like he had a different set of eyes than most people have. Like most people would go to the person that's the most important, or the person that you most wanted to talk to, or be sure you got a word into. My dad looked in the room and said, "Everybody in this place is my friend." My dad showed me how not to be restrained or bashful about the love of my wife. And he taught me that through the way he loved my mom. And so I've been able to watch that and observe that in his life, and apply that meaning for the way that I am Lori's husband. He taught me how to be a steady and supportive presence in the life of my daughters, my 3 daughters, in the way he was a steady and supportive a presence in my life and the life of my 2 sisters and my brother. Do you see? Do you see this? My dad's life had meaning. My dad's life has meaning today. I mean, just before the session, I was cracking jokes at the dinner table with my kids and my wife. You know how I did that? Their laughter came because I found meaning in my dad's death. Just today, I was at the grocery store at H-E-B because I am getting some materials to do another bake, a tart bake. I'm also going to try and bake white chocolate eclairs. Say a prayer for that. So anyway, I was at the cashier, and I see the cashier's name tag, and I call the cashier by his name and talk to him about how his day is going. So that cashier got an encounter of kindness from me today. Hopefully his day was a little brightened and he saw that someone cared about him. So the way that cashier at H-E-B felt in that encounter with me was because of my dad's life. So my dad's life impacted the cashier at HEB today. Do you see this? Why? Because I found meaning in his life, and that meaning now flows through me to other people. Right? This weekend, I'm going to make sure that Lori and I have some time together. I don't know what we'll do, but we're going to do something, and it's going to be just the two of us, and we're going to invest in our relationship. So Lori, Lord willing, will feel my care and concern and love for her this weekend. How she's able to feel that is because of the meaning of my father's life. Am I making sense to you here? Say yes. And I wonder, have you thought about this? Have you thought about how it is that you then will make meaning out of your loved one's life? These things that I talk about are the ways that I've chosen to honor him. And it's also, listen, how I've managed to find peace and healing since he's died. Finding meaning is also done in really magnificent and grandiose ways. Like you'll see people that have started foundations. You ever heard of Mothers Against Drunk Driving? That was started by a woman who was mourning the death of her daughter who was killed by a drunk driver. So everything that's happened through Mothers Against Drunk Driving happened because of the life of her daughter. She's found great meaning. Foundations have been started. Organ donations, all sorts of things, ways, incredible ways that people have found meaning in the lives of those who've died. But also I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be something like a massive foundation that raises $1 million. It can also be an encounter that you have with someone at the HEB. But what it is, it's like I haven't ended my relationship with my dad. I'm not talking about, like ghosts or anything. I'm talking about how I have, he would like for me to use this word, I'm sure, how I've distilled the meaning of his life and made it real in my own. And I'm now impacting the lives of others because I found meaning. Does every death have meaning? Kessler says yes. For some, it's going to take an incredible amount of work for you to find the meaning in your loved one's death, especially if this death was tragic or unexpected. So I get it. My finding my meaning in my father's life may be easier from someone who's mourning the loss of a child or someone who died quite tragically or unexpectedly. But Kessler says there is meaning in every life, and that in our grief we can find meaning for every death. He writes, in grief, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Kessler says, pain is the pure emotion we feel when someone dies. He goes on to say, suffering is like the noise our mind makes around the loss, like the false stories it tells us, or that is our mind is trying to tell us to make sense of the loss. It's the things that we do to look for something or someone to blame, to tear ourselves down, to beat ourselves up, in bargaining, that's the suffering, that we insist we punish ourselves by isolating ourselves, and all of that stuff that we do, that's suffering. Pain is emotion that we all feel because of loss. Suffering, he says, is the noise our mind makes. And he says that finding meaning is the way to put an end to the suffering. Even as we may still feel the pain of the loss. I want to close with reading you a couple of paragraphs from Kessler's book. If you have this book, it's on page 65. I'm going to read this, say something, and then we'll pray and be done. Thank you for your time tonight. There's a section here where Kessler talks about the death of his mother. His mother died when he was a teenager. He says, just as my relationship with my mother has continued to evolve in the half century since she died, all of us have the potential not just to hold on to the love we had, but to nourish and grow it. It's like what I'm doing with my father. When I work with the family member of someone who's dying, I often take the family members aside and ask, do you ever go into the room while your loved one is sleeping? They typically reply, of course. I ask them what they do when they're in the room, and they always have the same answer. Just sit there staring at him. The next time you're with him and he falls asleep, I suggest, take your chair and turn your back to him. I explain to them that we have an emotional and physical relationship with our loved ones, as well as a spiritual relationship. In our day-to-day lives, we rely on the physical. We know our loved ones are here because we can see and touch and hear them. But just as the person who loses one of his senses finds that the other senses become stronger, such as when a person goes blind and suddenly begins to hear much more acutely, we have the capacity to create a stronger emotional and spiritual relationship when the physical relationship is coming to an end. I suggest that when they're sitting in the chair facing away from the bed, unable to rely on sight, they should try to sense the fullness of their loved one's presence through these other modes of perception. Death is the ultimate change, the ultimate end. It is a change we think we can't understand, and an ending we think we can't survive. But although the change happens whether we want it to or not, we can find freedom in accepting it and understanding it as a prelude to something else. Hope that blesses you the way it blesses me. Because I think about like my dad and like my relationship with him was a prelude to the relationship I have with him now. There's meaning, friends, in those you've loved. There's meaning in their lives. And there is a place that you can have and maintain in your relationship with them right now. And I pray for you that God would comfort you, even in the midst of the loss that you're feeling and the list we talked about. And also that the Holy Spirit would speak to you about the great meaning that particularly your spouses had, and the purpose and meaning that their life can have for you and for others. Maybe some people that they would have never known, but will be blessed by because they lived. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, we thank you for this time tonight. We do want to remember before you those we've loved and have lost. Particularly, God, I pray that you would wrap your arms around the precious people that are hearing this, that have lost their spouses. Some of them recently, some of them years ago, but that loss is still felt every day. I pray that you would walk alongside them, help them to find the help that they need, give them wisdom in the decisions that they find themselves faced with. And Lord, help them see the meaning in the lives of their loved ones. Our faith, our hope is in you, Lord Christ, that when death comes, our life is changed, not ended. We thank you for the hope of the resurrection and the hope of being reunited in the courts of heaven with those that we've loved. But till then, God, we say we need you and we love you. And we thank you for the gift of each other and of the time we've had together tonight. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everyone. Don't forget to hit like on this little live stream. Share it on your social media feeds or tag a friend. You know what to do. If someone you know and love would be blessed by this, be sure and share them. And let's share the good news that we found together in Christ. Be well. Again, let me know how I can pray for you and support you in the chat or by email or phone call, however you do it. Be blessed, friends. Thanks for the time. And remember, God loves you.